Welcome back, folks. Today I want to jump back into some ICT concepts and describe why I think that the market is probably bullish going forward. But also I want to back it up a bit and talk about, maybe how I could have had a better insight into how it was bearish for the month of August. Okay? Well, first of all, August is historically kind of a bearish month, it's not a month that tends to follow whatever trend is going before it, right? And that definitely was true this month. And even news media was talking about that, so they were right in that sense. It's not every article's a conspiracy. Part of news media is just making money off of putting articles out to get ads, but there is a conspiracy that is peppered throughout the media that does intentionally bait in retail into the wrong side of the trade, which we've gone over many times. And actually, the first signal, I can't find the article because I didn't save it, unfortunately, but the front page of Market Watch, and I think even maybe Yahoo Finance, right around here, actually was saying, it was more for the S&P, but they were saying, the S&P is now officially in a bull market because it was up 20% or something like that. So right there, they're putting out articles saying, bull market officially back. So that was a bit of a red flag to me when I saw it, but I kind of brushed it off. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, it could sell off from there, but it won't be that bad. And I still think I'm right in that sense, but I still could have capitalized better on this sell-off. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to some ICT concepts, which I haven't, I'm going to remove these drawings to make it clearer. I haven't really talked about ICT. I even bashed him a bit. To be honest, though, now I'm a little bit more back on the ICT train in terms of trading. It's just, there were things before that I wasn't seeing as well that I'm seeing now. But what was the indication in August from an ICT perspective that the market was actually likely to sell off? It's actually pretty straightforward. If you look back at the bank panic, there was a little bit similar type thing going on, but it wasn't as clear, right? So from the very top, there wasn't a lot of like fair value gaps or anything. It just kind of chopped its way down. To me, that's a little bit of an indication that, hey, it's not really that powerful of a sell-off. As you can see, finally it did create some fair value gaps. Market traded up, filled in this volume imbalance right here. If you know what that is, you can look into the master in ICT. They'll teach you what a volume imbalance is. It trades perfectly into a volume imbalance. It comes down, takes out the lows, the sell side liquidity, then it goes up from there. Not very extreme though, not a huge payout or anything. Okay, and if you look from then on, there hasn't been any real fair value gaps in anything from a bearish perspective near the top. But at the beginning of August, there's a clear, stark contrast in price action to what we've been seeing so far this year, which was that instantly from the top, there's a big engulfing down close candle, which many traders would say that in and of itself is bearish. It creates a fair value gap between this candle's low and this candle's high, trades back up into it, perfectly hits back to near, or not perfectly, but it pretty much fills in the gap, does not close above the gap or the volume imbalance. It doesn't even really go into the volume imbalance, which to me says that eventually it will be revisited, but it sells off from that fair value gap, creates another fair value gap, trades up into the fair value gap, sells off from there, and so on. Okay. Well, if we look at what's happening now, guess what was just created again? A fair value gap. And this technically is a balanced price range, right? Where there's a fair value gap bearish and a fair value gap bullish overlapping. Technically, this is a BPR. So theoretically, this if it's going to be valid, it will not be violated. Remains to be seen, but what I see potentially happening is that even though this down close candle looks like a rejection of this order block and from this fair value gap, along the way to making that, the day before it fulfilled the creation of a fair value gap here. So this is relevant. This is highly relevant, and I would keep your eyes on this, because if price trades back down into here, I would be watching Wednesday's price action if it gives it to us, or whenever the next day that comes back down into here happens. I would be watching very carefully for a market structure shift to happen somewhere either in the midpoint of the fair value gap, at the very top of it, or near the bottom of it. Okay, at here, around here, or around here, I would be watching carefully on lower time frames, like go down to the hourly, 15-minute, 5-minute, and look for a market structure shift, for order flow to shift bullishly. And to me, that would be a long trade worth taking. Okay? So just like this was a signal and this was a signal that it was bearish for August, I believe now that this could very well be a signal that prices could very well be bullish from here on out. Okay? Remains to be seen. But if it is bullish from there, I mean, the next place that it's likely to target is at least this high. Now, this gap's already been used by here, and if you know anything about how fair value gaps work, it's not always the case, but usually that once they've been used once, they usually won't be used again. Sometimes they can be used again, but if they're going to be used again, most of the time it will go above the last high that used it, or if it's bullish, it would be a low. But so I say if it's bullish from here, it's most likely taking out this high, and most likely at least filling in this volume imbalance right here, potentially filling in this one here eventually, and then proceeding higher and eventually taking out all-time highs, right? Another sense that this was going to happen is that this high itself was rejecting from a fair value gap of a sort. Let's see. I don't remember exactly what it looks like, but if we just put a line there. Yes, so we go to a fair value gap that was used once, meaning it's a lower probability for a rejection, but it still did reject from there. Price went above the previous high to a part of the imbalance that has not been touched yet, and then it sold off from there. Now, this fair value gap and this volume imbalance are the last gaps that haven't been closed through between here and all-time highs. So to me, it really does make sense in retrospect. This is the last real gap, the last real imbalance in price before all-time highs. So it makes sense that it had to sell off from there, because it has to go another almost 1,000 points to get to the next place where price has never been before. I mean, it's not really a gap because there's just never been price there, but this is the last gap before all-time highs. So from a probability perspective, it just does make sense that even though this gap had already been used here, that once we traded above the high further into the imbalance, that it could sell off from there, because from after this volume imbalance is filled, from there on out, if price continues higher, it's probably a pretty straight shot to new highs, to new all-time highs. Okay, so yeah, anyway, that's just a little bit I got for you today. Really pay attention to fair value gaps, pay attention to order blocks, study them. It takes a long time to really get used to their nuances and stuff. Now you might say, this looks like a rejection, like a wick is often a rejection indicator. Yes and no. Okay, as you can see here, there's a wick, looks like a rejection, sells down, then there's another rejection wick and buys up. So again, if there's a wick created, or if it trades down into here but doesn't close in there, to me that's a pretty strong indication of bullishness. Now look also, this wick traded down into a real liquidity void, meaning a gap in price that has not been revisited, right? This one opened, traded down there and went up, and this traded below the low right there, just a little bit into the gap. Gaps don't always get filled. Sometimes they just get tapped into, right? You can tap into the beginning of them, go to the consequent encroachment of them, or you can completely fill them in, right? To here or to here. So, but it appears to have just done a bit of a tap, so about 25% of the gap, and then it reacted strongly to there. And so I wouldn't disregard that. I wouldn't say, oh, it's just going to keep selling off, even though it did trade here up into this bearish order block right here. You know, if price closes below this gap, like down in here area, then to me it does look pretty bearish, right? But if price rejects from within this gap or comes in, fills this gap, or if it goes below the gap but closes inside the gap or above the gap, to me that is the probability that it's bullish is greatly increased. Okay, so that's just what to pay attention for, guys. Keep checking out the news and all that. The reason the news isn't the best indicator right now is there's a lot of flip-flopping. There's a lot of both sides. There's a lot of bearishness and bullishness being promoted on the news. And so when it's all confusing like that, it's harder to get a obvious sentiment. Whereas like back here, during this time period, the news was overwhelmingly bearish, right? So that made it very easy to trade and make a lot of money, which, you know, I increased my account by a decent amount. I admittedly took some losses though during this month. Just even though I said, you know, I'm looking to buy here, buy here, buy here, and that's what I've done. But I did exit some positions in drawdown. So I gave back some of my gains from this, but definitely not near all of them. But so, yeah, so right now, that does fit the August thing where it's harder to trade in August historically. But here, the news was very one-sided. So it was very easy to just go against that news bias and make some long trades. Here, the news is very both sides. There's arguments for bullishness and bearishness like every day. So it's not as clear. So in times like that, it's probably not like gonna move as fast. But I don't know. That remains to be seen. Okay. All I can say is because the news isn't very one-sided, I've had to rely more on the ICT type stuff. Okay, so that's all for now, guys. Take care, and yeah, hope to talk to you guys again soon, and best of luck with trading.